please don't forget to subscribe, because a lot of people that watch my videos don't subscribe apparently, and hit that bell. I'm also live every day on twitch.tv/Hasanabi after 11 a.m. Pacific. I just didn't know if there was blood or not.
I could hear glass shatter. All of a sudden, I could hear glass shattering, and then there was dust everywhere.
The fire detonated about 2,700 metric tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly explosive material that was stored here in the port of Beirut. The explosion leveled the port and left a zone of destruction 6 miles wide, killing nearly 200 people and wounding thousands.
So this explosion just turned into what resembles, frankly, like a war zone. It was catastrophic. I still can't get the pictures out of my head to this day.
Every single day, somebody else is being died. For Lebanon, this was just one more catastrophe to an already perfect storm.
Long before the explosion, Lebanon's economy was in a deep crisis. Unemployment and poverty were on the rise, and people flooded the streets in outrage over and over again. For many, the explosion was the last straw. So how did Lebanon fall so far, and what can be done to fix it? The first thing to understand is the makeup of Lebanon's population. For centuries, it's been home to both Christians and Muslims, but communities are further divided into religious subgroups or sects, the largest being Maronite Christians and Sunni and Shia Muslims. In the mid-20th century, these three sects shared power, but there was a tension between them. In 1975, Maronite and Muslim militias sparked a civil war.
Lebanon, a country now torn in two by the vicious battle for supremacy between Christians and Muslims. 24 ceasefires have been agreed and broken.
Soon other sects formed militias and joined the
I'm gonna do other stuff after this.
conflict. In 1976, Syria invaded, and in 1982, Israel followed, fueling more violence. Fighting was particularly brutal in Beirut, which was divided among the militias.
The Muslims control West Beirut, the Christians are entrenched in the east. The toll of human life is horrifying.
Over the course of 15 years, more than 120,000 people died. Finally, in 1989, representatives of Lebanon's sects came together with other international leaders to end the war. They signed the Taif Agreement, which divided the government among the sects. In parliament, each group received a set number of seats and specific positions. The president would be a Maronite, the prime minister a Sunni, and the speaker of the parliament a Shia. Shortly after signing the agreement, most of the militias disbanded, but many of their leaders found a place in government. In this system, political parties were formed along religious lines, and each sect claimed different government ministries.
While it was meant to kind of smooth or transition the country into a post-conflict scenario, it actually allowed the conflict to persist by other means.
But this system wasn't designed to be permanent.
The idea was that within 3 years of the Taif Agreement, the actual governance of the country would move towards a non-sectarian system. That bit was never implemented.
Instead, the politicians separated their portions of government and turned them into fiefdoms, using them to enrich themselves and their sect.
They used them for patronage, to provide jobs, to siphon off funding from state coffers, and it allows the political leadership to perpetuate their control over their constituencies.
While using public money for personal gain, the politicians neglected to spend money on the services they were supposed to provide, like garbage collection. A report found that Lebanon was paying about $420 million a year for waste management. Despite that, in 2015, garbage piled up around the country while politicians argued over a new contract. It was the same story across the government. It spent $1 billion a year on electricity, a sector controlled by the Maronites, but there were blackouts multiple times a day. Every household paid a fee for public water, but much of it was undrinkable. By 2015, discontent against government corruption was on the rise, but nothing changed.
Demanding, for example, to put someone in jail because they were corrupt immediately became as if it was an attack against the entire community. It became very difficult to undertake any kind of changes or reforms.
And that meant the same people stayed in power, so government corruption continued to go unchecked. Over time, the government racked up dangerous amounts of debt, By 2015, it owed nearly $70 billion, more than the country's entire GDP. But instead of trying to fix the problem, the government turned its attention to Lebanon's most important industry.
So, since the end of Lebanon's civil war in 1990, Lebanon's economy in general has mostly been service-based. We don't produce a lot here. We are a heavy importing country. We import food, we import raw material, we import a lot of things.
Lebanon's businesses pay for imports with US dollars, which they get through the banks. And Lebanon's banks famously offer high interest rates, which attract deposits from clients all over the world, making it the most important sector in Lebanon. Most of the banks are owned by or have ties to sectarian politicians, and together they created a scheme to bring more money into the government. It started with the central bank, which funds the government, offering very high interest rates as an incentive to commercial banks. So these banks deposited money there and made a huge profit from the interest. In turn, the banks hiked their own interest rates, even higher to attract deposits around the world, and then poured that money into the central bank. But this was unsustainable. Neither the banks nor the government could really cover all this interest.
It's quite accepted that it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme, encouraging people to put their money in the banks and keep them there because of high interest rates, knowing that the banks might not be able to maintain that, is a ripoff.
The only thing keeping this scheme together was the bank's ability to attract more and more money. And that started to crack in 2011, when Lebanon's neighbor Syria collapsed in the civil war. Worried about putting their money so close to the conflict, investors started pulling out of Lebanon's banks. But the scheme didn't fully unravel until 2017, when Lebanon's prime minister disappeared.
I hereby announce my resignation as Prime Minister from the Lebanese government, knowing that the will of the Lebanese is stronger and their determination is steadfast.
The Sunni Prime Minister Saad Hariri resigned via a televised statement from Saudi Arabia. Then reports claim the Saudis forced him to resign and were keeping him there.
Nothing has justified the apparent...
Isn't this the guy who got kidnapped? Why can't I put it back in? Oh, I did. Okay.
Knowing that the will...
2017, when Lebanon's prime minister disappeared.
I hereby announce my resignation as Prime Minister from the Lebanese government, knowing that the will of the Lebanese is stronger and their determination is steadfast.
The Sunni Prime Minister Saad Hariri resigned via a televised statement from Saudi Arabia. Then reports claim the Saudis forced him to resign and were keeping him there.
Nothing has justified the apparent detention of Hariri by Saudi Arabia.
Saad al-Hariri and his family are hostages in the kingdom.
After 10 days, the prime minister returned to Lebanon and took back his office, but the damage had been done. This time, international investors lost faith in Lebanon and deposits plummeted. Even Lebanese residents rushed to pull their money out of the banks. Without new deposits, the government's and banks' debt.
This is why usury is a sin, dude. They've never done usury. Allah is punishing them.
Skyrocketed. In 2019, the banks ran out of money and froze accounts, limiting what people could withdraw, leaving Lebanon's people with a catastrophic problem.
And people can't take out their dollars and they can't import. Or what they do is that they hike up.
Dude, trying to comprehend what happens within Lebanese sex and Lebanese politics is like engaging in the history of the Balkans. Okay, I am so confused every time I try to figure it out. It's such a goddamn mess, dude. It's literally like, what? Another video of the Communist Party? Hez Bolsonaro. Like, could you imagine? Like, listen, this is Lebanon, and I don't know how much power the Lebanese Communist Party has. I don't know enough about Lebanese politics, but like, they can at least fucking fill up the streets as they wave like a hammer and sickle flag. Can you imagine? Like, American Marxist-Leninists are like, American Marxist-Leninists talk about like a vanguard party. Meanwhile, like, if this happened in America, they would get genocided by like white supremacist militias and cops, literally gunning them down on the streets side by side while high-fiving each other with like automatic rifles that they somehow found. Like, there would be a drone strike and not a single American would say, wow, that's really fucked up. This is like the entire population of lefties in America, by the way. All together. Actually, I'm being really nice to the American leftist movement. Like, this is not as many communists that live in America right now to this day. It's like my chat. Okay.
The prices. So now all these goods that are imported are now extremely expensive. They're talking about life-saving medicines, basic healthcare equipment, grain shortages, fuel as well.
To cover its debt, the government announced a new tax, sparking a revolution.
Lebanon is in the grip of unprecedented protests.
The anger was sparked by the government's announcement of a daily tax of 20 US cents on messaging applications such as WhatsApp.
To many, it was evidence that the whole system was corrupt. And people from all sects flooded the streets in some of the biggest
sick.
protests Lebanon had seen in decades.
And so the uprising was really about eliminating this ruling class of political party, which divide middle and working class people based on sect, but at the top, they just shared a slice of the pie together. So a lot of people realized that this has got to go. There needs to be a new way of doing politics.
If only there was, I don't know, if only that was analogous to America, and instead of sect, just substitute that for race. It just sounds kind of familiar to me. I don't know. I just can't really think about it. Wow, actual non-LARPers who actually care about organizing? No way. Why are you trying to make a comparison in America with like revolutionary parties and revolutionary action that have existed throughout history, or communist parties that like exist in other countries? Why would you ever make a comparison like this? You just did. No, I do it when I'm making fun of Marxist-Leninists, dog. That's the whole point. I do it because I'm right. When you try to do it as far as like building coalitions and whatnot, you're wrong. Because there isn't that many people. Like, there isn't that many people that are just firmly Marxists even, or leftists even. Yeah, they have active communist and socialist parties. That's what I'm saying. We don't have anything. We don't have shit.
It was enough to force Prime Minister Hariri to finally step down, but the political parties stayed in power. Meanwhile, other countries and international organizations offered economic aid to Lebanon if the government could reform itself. But the politicians couldn't agree, and the economy kept falling apart. In 1 year, Lebanon's currency lost more than 80% of its value, and unemployment has reportedly surged. This was the state of the country when an explosion rocked Beirut. While at first it appeared to be an accident, the blast turned out to be the result of this dysfunctional system. According to reports, the ammonium nitrate sat in the port for 7 years, while government officials bickered over who was responsible for it.
It's criminal negligence at best. They knew what this was, they knew what it meant, and yet this material, it was left to language in Beirut's port.
Prime Minister Hassan Diab and several ministry leaders resigned, but the power-sharing agreement remains intact. It's why many in Lebanon feel the country can't recover until this system is abolished.
This is a deranged. نحن مش طموحنا بس استقالة الحكومة، استقالة العهد كله سوا.
يعني حتى حل المجلس النيابي بالأكمل، حتى رئيس الجمهورية ما بقبضنا إياه.
To make matters worse, there's been a spike in coronavirus cases since the blast. And now, with its only major port destroyed in the explosion, Lebanon is struggling to import what its people need to survive.
And while all of the political leadership is paying lip service to the catastrophe that has befallen Beirut, no one really seems to be taking much action.
It's left the Lebanese people to simultaneously demand for change and pick up the pieces.
There are people on the ground helping residents pick up their lives, clean up, rebuilding, and this is all personal initiative.